Hi everyone, and welcome back. Today I'm going to explore how we can actually limit the number of entries we make in a form, but also we can push this even a little further to even limit how much can be entered into a table directly. And it's an important distinction, and there's different approaches that need to be taken depending on the scenario we're dealing with. Now I'm going to start off by looking at the form. The reason being is typically users should never have access to your tables. Okay, so for me, the second thing we're going to discuss, the second part of this discussion, is somewhat moot because you really shouldn't even be facing this problem. You should be able to control everything through your forms normally. But I also am fully aware that sometimes we don't always control, employers, clients make certain demands, and then we have to come up with other workarounds and solutions to solve these problems, and there are some. So let's dive into how do we limit the number of records in a form. I'll come back to the article in 2 seconds, but I just want to show you demo database. All I did basically is I used the create and I pulled contacts, created a whole bunch of stuff. I deleted the vast majority of it, and I kept the table and I kept the contact details form. Then I duplicated it where I've implemented the limiting code. So let's just take a very fast glance at the existing data. Now the existing data, as you can see, is I have 5 entries. And if we were to go in here normally, we could then go and just start creating anything we want. Jill J, and you'll see it will work just fine, and it will let us go and create as many records as we want. And that's all fine and dandy. Let's come back here for 2 seconds. Let's cut out the 6th one. And let's do a compact and repair. And just to keep things clean, it resets the primary key counting. So we're back at the initial state. Now I want to block, for whatever reason, this form. You could also do it in a sub form, but I want to limit the number of entries to 5. It could be any number, and you're going to see it's very easy to configure. How do we do this? Well, it's all the code you need is right here. And basically I have this value here. We could have made it a constant very easily, but how many records are we going to allow in total? And then it just comes through here and it's checking as a new record. We're checking the current count of records on the form and so on and so forth. And basically, if you exceed the number, well, then it's going to move you back to the last one. Okay. After displaying a message, obviously, to the user. This is great, like I say here in the message, for demo databases, amongst other things, where you could have some type of procedure that it's limited to X number of records, and then if they register it, you give them a key, it unlocks this, and this is no longer in place. So how do we implement this? Well, it really is simple. I took a copy of the form, I came over to the current events, and I created the current event that you now see here. And it literally is a copy paste from the website. I have changed nothing. And here we set, like I said, the number of maximum records we want to be permissible through that form. So if we now open it up and we say we want to go to a new record, you see right off the bat, you can't. It will not allow it. However, this brings us to the second portion of this discussion is, what if my users have access to a query or directly to the table where we don't have that code running now? So what protection can we put? Because a user, if they have access to the table, could come here and just start typing, and it's freely acceptable. How do I block this? Well, we have to look at another option. I'll recompact it just so we're working with a clean setup again. And I have a second article for that. And it involves constraints. Now, this is something we don't discuss. We don't see very much in the realm of Microsoft Access. You see this with many other database systems out there, SQL Server for sure, but many of the other, they all have the notion of constraints. Access has it too. It's not something that we discuss. It's not something that's used. There's no interface for managing them. So what you end up finding out is that this is going to be something you're going to do through VBA. Now, we have to build our query that will build and create the constraint we want on the table. And these can be a wide variety of things. And I have a few mentioned here, but there are many, many others. And one of which, the first one, is how you can limit the maximum number of records in a table. This is what we're going to explore today. But as you can see here, we can use it to turn a table into a read-only mode. You can add constraints, for instance, that an end date has to be superior to a start date field. So on and so forth, etc. So let's just take a look at this guy here. We're going to apply this query. It's a query that will implement a constraint. And if we look at it, I have it in the VBA window. I created two simple subroutines, one that adds a constraint, and then obviously I also want to demonstrate removing it. So the command itself is really very straightforward. It's this. And what is it? You're saying alter the table, whatever the table name is, and you're saying add a constraint. So now we're creating our constraint. And what is that constraint? Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to give it a descriptive name, because you can have multiple constraints. And you can use VBA even to enumerate constraints. And if you want to delete it, you have to know the name of the constraint that you want to delete, etc. You want this to be descriptive. Okay, you can make it anything you want. Yeah, you can do constraint 1, 2, 3, but that won't help you understand what is that constraint if you review this in 6 months and 6 years. So give it a descriptive name. And then here you build your constraint. In our case, we're going to do a check. And what's that check? Well, I want to check that we aren't going beyond 5 records. The way to do that in this context is I'm going to count my primary key field, which is ID. And I'm going to simply check that value. So it's going to return basically a count of the number of records. And I'm going to say I want it to be inferior or equal to 5. So the minute it goes to 6, no, you're not meeting my constraint. Therefore, it will be blocked. The table just won't allow it. And that's it. Now, we have an issue. And there's a reason I have it here in VBA. Look what happens if we try to build a simple query. So we go into SQL view, we drop this in place, and we say run. Oops, we get a syntax error, and it always comes back to check. So Microsoft Access will not allow us to do it through the query window. Don't ask me why. Once again, to me, this is a major bug. It's a major limitation that should have been addressed long ago. But regardless, this is why I go through using VBA. We use the current project connection execute approach to run it. So let's run it. Right now, I have no constraints on that table. As you saw, I was able to input another record, no problem. If we come here and we simply run it, it is already run. And now, if I come here and I say I want to create a new entry, the minute I move off of it and then basically going to try to save that record, we're going to get an error. And it tells us here, one or more of the values prohibited by the validation rule, limit contact 5 records, which was the name we gave to our constraint, set for contacts. So right off the bat, you're blocked. Now, it's not a very elegant message, I'll give you that, but it is enforcing the constraint we wanted. Therefore, we're able to protect our table. And if we go into the unlocked form, and the same thing, we want to do a new entry, the minute I try to save and close, we get that exact same error message. So then you have to undo to get out of the form. And that is how hard it is, how easy it is to create a constraint in reality. You just have to know we're going through VBA. Similarly, to remove a constraint, if you look, I have the basic syntax here for you, which I've replicated here. So we're doing the same thing, current project connection execute. This time it's simply this. And all it is alter your table name, drop the constraint, and you give it the name of the constraint you want removed. If we run this, there you go. And now when we come here, it will accept the value without any problem. Now, have you noticed one thing, however, with applying the constraint, whether it be an entry through the table or through the form? It's still indexed the primary key. Now, realistically, that really should not pose a problem. Primary key value should have zero importance to you or your users. If you need a number that has significance to you, then you should be creating a separate field for that. However, I still wanted to point it out because I still know that many of you still do use the primary key as a very critical element, and you expect it to be sequential. So the constraint will not stop that indexation, okay? But basically, those are the two methods that I use for limiting and controlling how many records can be entered in a form or a table query. And the choice is yours. In all cases, this really isn't very complex. It's very easy. They're easy to configure. You know, it's a simple value that you change here. If you didn't want the value to be here, it could be a database property that you read. It could be something in a configuration table that you use, let's say, DLOOKUP to read in runtime. There's a whole slew of approaches that you can use for defining this number. Obviously, in the case of defining a constraint against a table, it's a static value. I've never actually tried to do anything beyond that, but normally it's a hard-coded value. Now that I say that, I'm curious if something like a DLOOKUP or some other technique like a select or something would work and give some flexibility. Maybe something I'll have to explore and expand on my article. But as you can see, this is very simple. It's a single line that you run, you execute to add it and to remove it. And the same thing here. It's one entry that you simply adjust based on what you need. You want to push this even further for whatever reason, you could even add in some type of authentication. If it's this user, they're limited. If it's that user, they're not. The sky's the limit for that type of customization. But I just wanted to highlight these two distinct approaches to limiting the number of records in a form, subform, table, or query. I hope this helps a few of you out there, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care, everyone.